I'm really glad and proud to have Dr. Yvonne Kason here. She is a medical doctor and also the first person to coin the term is spiritually transformative experiences. And she just released a new book, and we're going to talk about that. And she has had 5 near-death experiences and multiple STEs. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, AJ. I really appreciate it. And it's my delight to do this book launch for Soul Lessons from the Light, my new book.
Yes, I've been reading Soul Lessons from the Light, and I think it's great.
It's a tiny little book, 234 pages,
Okay.
and really easy to read because it's my story. It's the story of my spiritual awakening, as you know, because you've been reading it.
Yes. So you begin by talking about your experiences when you were a kid. You say that you had 2 near-death experiences, and I've interviewed you and you've mentioned your other experiences, but we've never talked about your childhood near-death experiences. You were also brought up partially in Canada, also the States and Switzerland. So can you talk to us about that?
I was born and raised primarily in Canada, in the Toronto, Canada area. But my mother is from Switzerland and my grandparents still lived in Switzerland. So we used to go every, second or third summer, we would travel to Switzerland. The mountains behind me are a photo I took from Switzerland and spend time at my grandparents' home. And I didn't realize it for most of my life. But I actually had my very first near-death experience one summer when I was in Switzerland visiting my grandparents with my family. And what happened was in Switzerland, a lot of people travel by train, much more than they do so in Canada. And we were traveling as a family to go somewhere, I don't know, perhaps to visit a relative or something. And so this one day I was 5 years old. It was the summer before I started kindergarten. And my whole family, my 2 brothers, my sister, my mother, my father, and I, we were all in Switzerland together. And I was the second oldest. I had an older brother and a younger brother and sister. So my parents were hanging on to my younger brother and sister, and I was sort of on my own, not holding on to a parent. And we were at this train station at the nearby town waiting for a train. And this was all very exciting for me as a 5-year-old. This was brand new, something we didn't do in Canada. So I was looking around and I was really curious. And I saw a station hand jump off the platform, jump onto the railway tracks, scoot across the railway tracks, and then climb up onto the next platform. And being a little kid, I thought, oh, that looks like fun, thinking of what we do in the playground when we climb. So I leaned forward to jump on the tracks, planning to do what I saw the station hand do. And then all of a sudden, when I was like sort of in an angle, already starting my jump, it was like time stood still, like my life was a movie and somebody pressed the pause button. And suddenly it's like everything froze and me or my consciousness or my point of awareness whoosh, suddenly was up above the scene, maybe 20 feet or 25 feet. And from that perspective of 20, 25 feet above, I could see in the, not too, that a train was rapidly pulling into the train station and I was about to be hit by a train. And I remember that as I saw this and as I realized this while I was up there, I now know I was out of body, but as a child, I had no idea what this was. I could see that I was about to be hit by a train. And I remember thinking that very clearly, thinking, oh, I see. I'm about to be hit by a train. And what I also remember, which is very curious, was I was not at all frightened. There was no fear. I was like completely calm. And, oh, I see what's going to happen now is I'm going to be hit by a train. And then all of a sudden, it was as if somebody released the pause button and the movie of my life started again. And then an adult's hand came from behind and grabbed my little 5-year-old body and pulled me back onto the platform. And the train whisked in front of me, you know, with a gust of air in my face, but it didn't hit me because I'd been pulled out of the way. And then immediately, of course, my parents started scolding me and blah, 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 blah. And I was just sort of shocked because I really didn't know what happened. And I didn't talk about it afterwards. Like I didn't talk to my parents or my grandparents because I didn't want to be scolded again. You know, they didn't know what had happened to me. And as a child, I didn't know this was anything paranormal. It was just what happened to me. But I remember now as an adult looking back, there's another aspect to this experience that is a sign of a near-death experience. I now realize this out of body and time standing still and the peace that came over me. These are all signs of a near-death experience. That the after effect I had was also another sign of a near-death experience, which was that afterwards, I was absolutely convinced that I could fly. I mean, I think I was actually having out-of-body experiences in my dreams afterwards. Like I was having more out-of-body experiences, but I didn't realize it. Like I have memory of like flying down the street and flying over to the schoolyard, etc. So how I understood that as a 5-year-old was that I could fly. And I remember when I went to kindergarten, I started kindergarten that fall and I made a new little friend. I said to my little friend, guess what? I can fly. And of course, my friend laughed at me and said, no, that's impossible. Nobody could do it. But I had such a clear recall of what I considered flying, the train station, and then flying, which I guess must have been dreams I was having afterwards, out of body experiences and dreams, flying down the street, that I thought, no, I'll show him. So I climbed up on my fence. I remember this so clearly. I climbed up on the fence in front of my house. I spread out my wings like this, like a bird, and I jumped off, planning to fly down the street and show my friend that I could fly. And then, of course, I fell right down to the ground. And I remember my reaction, because my reaction was I was confused. I was puzzled. I couldn't figure out why I could so clearly remember flying, but when I was trying to show my friend how to fly, that I could fly, that I couldn't do it. So now I realize that was my first near-death experience when I was 5 years old, when I was almost hit by a train.
Wow, that's amazing. But you also have another near-death experience, which was also when you were quite young.
My second childhood near-death experience, I now realize, happened when I was 11 years old. I just turned 11, and I was still a youngster. I was nowhere near puberty yet. And I never realized for most of my life, it's the same as my 5-year-old experience. I never realized for most of my life that it was a near-death experience. It was just what happened to me. I had no idea it was paranormal and wasn't happening to other people all the time. So basically what happened when I was 11 years old is my family was moving from Toronto, Canada, where I had been raised most of the time. And we were moving to Los Angeles, California. And we were driving in our family car. My father was driving. It was a big station wagon where in olden days, you'd have bench seats in the front and in the second row, and then a big compartment for luggage in the back in the station wagon. And my mom and dad were in the front row, and myself, my 2 brothers, my sister, we were all crammed in the second row bench seat. No seat belts. This was way before seat belts. And then all of the luggage for 6 people was jammed into the back of the station wagon. And we were driving along the highway, starting to head to Los Angeles. Our furniture from our house had all been packed up in a moving truck. And so we were going to meet the moving truck in Los Angeles. Anyway, what happened was, maybe an hour or 2 out of Toronto, we were driving along the highway pretty fast, and Dad had, we think, a flat tire, and suddenly the car lurched. And I remember that feeling of the lurch, that I was sitting in the back seat looking out the window, and then suddenly there was a lurch, and I was said, Dad, what's that? And I remember my dad saying something, oh, I think it's a flat tire, something like that. But that's my last memory until several days later. But even though, and I now know that I had a head injury and I was unconscious for 3 days. But interesting, I have other memories during those 3 days. And what I always have remembered is hovering above the accident scene. It was like my point of perception. I was above the accident. I now know I was unconscious. I'd had a head injury, but back then I was above the accident scene looking down. And I can clearly remember hovering above my father. And my father had been very seriously injured in the accident. He had a big laceration top of his scalp. Blood was pouring down his face. The people who'd come to rescue him, they pulled him to the side of the road, and he was there at the side of the road, bleeding profusely. And they had also found and brought to the side of the road my mother, my older brother, my younger brother, and my sister. But they hadn't found me, because it seems, I've been told, that in the process of the accident, somehow I got thrown back into the luggage part at the back of the station wagon, and the car spun a few times because it went down a steep embankment, and it was all crushed, and nobody saw my little body stuck underneath the suitcases at the back. They thought they had everybody at the side of the road. And my father, he was saying, and I could hear this and I saw it from above, that my father kept on saying, my daughter. And, the rescuers, they thought maybe he was delirious and didn't realize, we have your daughter, because they had my sister. They didn't realize there were 2 daughters. But my dad kept on going, my daughter. And he later confirmed to me that this was absolutely true, that he said that even though he was in really critical condition, he kept on counting, and one of his daughters was missing, and he just kept saying, my daughter, that they had to keep looking to try and find the other daughter. Eventually, I am told that a passerby, went to the damaged car to see if, I guess, anything could be salvaged from the luggage. And then, there's somebody else in here. They found my foot or something sticking out, and they managed to pull my unconscious body out. So my next memory, and interestingly enough, when I think about that, I wonder if the fact that Dad was calling out for me was why my body was hovering and my consciousness was hovering above him. I wonder if it's that bond of love that somehow my soul knew he was calling for me. And so that's why my soul was hovering above my father. Anyway, the next memory I have during that time, those 3 days that I was unconscious, was maybe an hour or 2 later, when we were brought by ambulance to an emergency department. And I remember, I've always had clear memory of, again, I'm floating up high. It was as if the ceiling had become invisible or transparent, and I could look through the ceiling. So I was 15 or 20 feet above my body, looking down, and I could see I was on one of those little examining tables in an emergency department. There were 2 men huddled over my body. I guess they were doctors. I could clearly see like what little outfit I was wearing and everything. I was unconscious. And I could see from a top-down perspective, looking down, those big round operating room, emergency room lamps, those disc-shaped round lamps. But I was looking from a top-down perspective. And, as an 11-year-old, I had no idea what these lamps looked like, but that was what I saw. And, years later, as I trained as a medical doctor, of course, I was often in emergency rooms and operating rooms, and I saw the surgical lamps. And that was exactly what I had seen, but from a top-down perspective, even though as a child, I had no idea what they looked like. And then it's like my memory jumped. And the next memory that I have is I have very clear memory of when I woke up, when I came out of the coma. And I remember very clearly, like sort of waking up, not really knowing where I was, having to take a few minutes just to sort of figure out where I was. And where I was in the hospital, in a children's ward, in a room that had other children in beds as well, and like a large crib. It had like sides that were pulled up. And so I remember my first thought when I woke up was, oh, I have to pee. So I pulled out whatever IVs or whatever were on my arm, and I looked around. I mean, I was 11 years old. I was able to climb over that railing. So I climbed over that railing, and then I started looking around for a washroom and had to go down the hall to find one. And then all of a sudden a nurse comes out of nowhere and starts scolding me and says, get back in bed, get back in bed. And I said, I have to pee, I have to pee. And I didn't realize they'd put me in diapers. And I mean, heavens, as an 11-year-old, I hadn't worn diapers for years. So I wasn't about to pee in my diapers. So yeah, I remember those 3 episodes very clearly. And it's interesting to me that my memory for when I was out of body during that near-death experience is shorter than the amount of time that I was unconscious. I was unconscious for 3 days. But another thing that's very interesting is the after effect after that. And I talk about this all in my new book, everybody.
Soul Lessons from the Light. I really recommend it. It's your new book. Yeah, there it is. You can buy it right now because it not only talks about these 2 near-death experiences, it talks about all 5. I like chapter 10 a lot because it talks about how you came up with the term spiritually transformative experiences. But before we talk about that, I would like to ask you, when was the first time you heard the word near-death experience? And did you recognize that you had some sort of near-death experience when you first heard about the term?
Well, I probably first heard the word around 1976 or 1977. There was a person I had met in Toronto who said they had a near-death experience. And, I had but it never dawned on me that my childhood experiences were near-death experiences until maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. And my first adult near-death experience, which I've talked about on some of your other shows, happened in 1979 when I was in a medevac plane crash and almost died, almost froze to death. And after that experience, I mean, I went out of body, I went into the light, and I had a profound mystical experience in the light of the love, intelligence, past, present, future, infinite knowledge, wisdom of the higher power. And it totally transformed me, made me lose my fear of death, made me much more understanding of diverse spiritual paths, that they were all leading to the same one truth. They're just heading different angles up the mountain. I mean, it was such a powerful experience. But when I tried to find a word for it, I went to this person who had a near-death experience, who was the only person I knew who knew anything about it in Toronto. And so this person said to me, well, did you see a tunnel with a white light at the end? And I went, well, no. And then he went, well, were you clinically fully dead for a period of time? And I said, no. So he said, it is not a near-death experience. So I went, oh, okay. So it's not a near-death experience. So I started looking for other words to describe it. And the best word I was able to find for many years was a mystical experience. It was a mystical experience when I was close to death. But over the years, as a medical doctor, started researching, and I talk about this in the book because I started researching all types of spiritual and paranormal experiences, I came to the conclusion that I really thought they need to expand the definition of near-death experiences, that I felt that to limit it to only if you were clinically dead then came back is not accurate, because many people, and I've now talked to many people, read of many people who have near-death experiences when they're close to death or facing death. They think they're about to die, which is what happened to me in both of my childhood near-death experiences and also my plane crash near-death experience. Actually, my first 4 I was close to death or facing death. It was only in my fifth that I was actually clinically dead. So I met one of the pioneers, one of the founders of the International Association for Near-Death Studies in 1990, Dr. Kenneth Ring. And I remember by that time, I thought, I think I had a near-death experience, and I think they need to change their definition. But who am I? I'm this youngster compared to these experts. So when I met him, I told him what happened to me, and sort of, I don't know, summoning up all my courage, I said, I think the definition of a near-death experience has to be expanded to include people who are close to death and facing death. And I didn't know if he was going to scold me or whatever, because he's much, much older than I am. But Kenneth Ring instead just burst out laughing. And he said, yes, Yvonne, we have come to that conclusion too. Absolutely, we agree with you. And we became great friends, and we're great friends to this day. And so many people independently have come to that conclusion, that being clinically dead and coming back is one of the times people have near-death experiences. Other times is when they're facing death, when they think they're going to die. And another time is when they're close to death, like in a coma, for example, like I was.
You always say that you were the first Canadian doctor to specialize in NDEs and STEs. But my question is, are you the world's first doctor to specialize in NDEs and STEs, both?
That's a difficult question to answer. I would say, using that particular term, spiritually transformative experiences, yes, I was the first Canadian doctor to specialize in spiritually transformative experiences, because I coined the phrase. I coined the phrase in 1994 as an umbrella term that would be inclusive, that would include near-death experiences, but it would also include mystical experiences of many types, that it would also include psychic, out-of-body, paranormal, intuitive experiences of many types, that it would also include kundalini, Holy Spirit, spiritual energy awakenings. It would also include inspired creativity. So it was to be a broad and inclusive term for this broad range of experiences that all seem to have similar after effects. And in fact, according to the yogic model of consciousness, which I found when I was researching as a doctor, just trying to understand what was happening to me and to other people, that because current Western medicine does not have an understanding of any of these types of experiences of consciousness. They have historically been dismissed as imagination or a hallucination or even a sign of mental illness. And I knew that's not true. There must be some other understanding. So when I searched for understanding, the best model I found was in yoga. And how it's understood in yoga is that our human consciousness has the capacity to have a broader range of ability, of capacity. And some people use the metaphor of the unused parts of our brain. You know how they say that 75% of our brain or something is not being used, that maybe some of these unused parts of the brain are being activated, making it possible for us to have mystical experiences, have our consciousness expand to be able to have mystical states of consciousness, our consciousness being able to expand so that we develop clairvoyant abilities or mediumistic abilities or clairaudience abilities or inspired creative abilities. That Gopi Krishna actually thought this was part of human evolution, that what would be happening to human beings as a species in evolution is that our range of consciousness would be expanding. So it's not like we're going to grow a new arm or grow a new leg or grow a tail or something like that in evolution, but that what's considered normal consciousness will be expanding. And there's some evidence to support this. I mean, it's in the yogic and Buddhist theories going back thousands of years. And great saints and adepts have had this expanded range of consciousness, but they've been quite humble about it. But evidently, there historically, when you look back, there's already evidence that human consciousness range is expanding.
You have somehow merged the Hindu knowledge and the Buddhist knowledge with the Christian, or with the early Christian model before it was turned into a religion, which was, it had a lot to do with the Buddhist way of life and also with the Hinduist sannyasis. And Christ basically did not pursue riches here on earth. He talked about those in heaven. So he also said that my kingdom is not of this world. And also he had a transfiguration in which he turned into a being of light before some of his apostles. And
he had many what we now call spiritually transformative experiences of many kinds. I mean, he had healing abilities. He was able to turn water to wine. You know, that he had the transfiguration experience. He had mystical states of consciousness, you know, a profound state, probably ongoing mystical communion. And many say that those lost years when he was a teenager, there's much evidence that he actually traveled to India and he studied in India with the yogis and the lamas from Buddhism and yoga. And then when he came back after that period in training in Eastern mysticism, some even say the three wise men from the East were adepts, yogic and Buddhist adepts, and that he returned the visit when he went to India.
I've been thinking, you know, these days, how difficult or how tough it was for a medical doctor, a young medical doctor, to start talking about her near-death experiences and her spiritual and mystical experiences in a time, I'm talking about the 90s, when there was basically no internet, no information. What was the reaction of the medical society back then? Were you bullied, scorned? Did you have a hard time? Or was it easy? Because I've seen that organizations like IONS, they use the term spiritually transformative experience.
Now,
Yeah. So,
they took that, they learned that from me because I'm a past president of IONS. Before that, they never used it.
So what happened when you first dared and were brave enough to come and say, look, I have had multiple near-death experiences and multiple STEs? What was the reaction of the scientific world?
Now that I'm retired, I don't have to worry about that. That's why I felt free enough to write Soul Lessons from the Light, because I don't have to worry about it anymore. So this is the first time that I'm being, you know, completely open about my experiences. So I invite listeners to read that. But yes, I met with a lot of resistance indeed, AJ, you are correct. And it was before the 90s, you know, because my plane crash, I had a kundalini awakening, I now realize, in 1976, which again, I had no idea what that was. And then the plane crash near-death experience in 1979 that, you know, I was told it was not a near-death experience. Okay, well, maybe it's a mystical experience. Well, after that, as after effects, I now realize I had a psychic awakening and I started having clairvoyant experiences, clairaudient experiences, clairsentient experiences. And then I started getting past life recall and many mediumship experiences, many things that I now know through my research and other people's research are common after effects to both a kundalini awakening and a near-death experience. But this was not known back then, not at all. And I didn't know, all I could do was observe what was happening to me. And I knew I wasn't crazy, and people around me knew I wasn't crazy. When I tried to talk to people, AJ, at first, particularly to doctors, because being a medical doctor, I know a lot of doctors. I work with a lot of doctors. So, I tried talking to some of my doctor friends and just genuinely asking them, has anyone heard of anything like this? Like, I didn't even know what to call, what name to put on the experience I had in the plane crash, which I now know is a near-death experience. And I remember my doctor colleagues and friends, and some of them were very senior, very experienced, highly experienced medical teacher doctors, like really high quality specialists. They would listen. Nobody thought I was crazy, but everybody, absolutely everybody, came up with a hallucination theory, that it was a hallucination brought on by an electrolyte imbalance or cold or a low blood sugar or something like this. And that absolutely did not resonate with me as truth. I mean, as a young doctor, I'd already seen many people with low blood sugars and electrolyte imbalances, and they were not having their lives transformed in such a positive, spiritual way by having an electrolyte imbalance. No. And so I quickly learned to shut up. Basically, I went into the closet. And for many years, I would say for almost 12 years, I led a double life. So on the outside, I was a traditional Western trained medical doctor. I had a very successful career at the University of Toronto, a teaching position, and I got promoted. And, there was that whole successful medical part of my life. Then there was my in the closet private life. And my in the closet private life and my private time, I was a spiritual seeker. I was meditating regularly. I was having all sorts of experiences, as I mentioned, spiritually transformative experiences, but I was also researching everything I could find, whether it be in the medical literature, the psychological literature, in the spiritual traditions, in many different spiritual traditions. I was trying to see what has been written about these types of states of consciousness. And are there words for it? Is there a vocabulary? And so with my own research over those 12 years, I finally came to recognize that what I was experiencing was, yes, I'd had a kundalini awakening in 1976. I was continuing to have kundalini symptoms all these years because kundalini remains active after an awakening, particularly if you're further stimulating it by meditating regularly, which I was. And yes, I'd had a near-death experience with mystical experiences, and I found words, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, past life recall. And I discovered that there was a vocabulary for this, but I had to be in the closet. I couldn't talk to doctors about this.
When did you start sharing your story? I mean, did you find a sharing circle? Were you able to meet with other experiencers before writing your first book?
As I talk in Soul Lessons from the Light, by divine orchestration or divine synchronicity, I had the opportunity to travel to India in 1977. This was after my Kundalini awakening, although I'd not realized that's what it was called. And I met Gopi Krishna in India, and he was talking about Kundalini awakening at a week-long sort of seminar about Kundalini awakening, because he thought many people in the West and all around the world would start having Kundalini awakenings because it's part of the evolutionary stage of the planet. And so I started reading about Kundalini, and he became a mentor to me, and he always encouraged me to do Kundalini research. And I read all of his books, all 17 of his books, and I read other books on Kundalini and yogic philosophy. So sort of by word of mouth to a very, very small number of people who were interested in these sorts of experiences, it sort of became known that Yvonne knows quite a bit about Kundalini awakening. And I was invited by Dr. Bonnie Greenwell to speak at a conference in California in 1990, being put on by the Spiritual Emergence Network and the Institute for Transpersonal Psychology on Kundalini awakening. So this was like really big because nobody was talking about Kundalini awakening, and certainly very few people had much information about it. So me, having learned firsthand from Gopi Krishna, I was invited as an expert to share what I had learned about Kundalini awakening at this conference. So I went there, and Dr. Greenwell said to me, she and I later became very close friends, Yvonne, why don't we, on the second last evening or something of this conference, why don't we offer to have like a sharing circle, just in case there's anybody here at this conference who's actually had a Kundalini awakening and who'd like to talk to us. And so I said, okay, let's do that. She's a PhD in transpersonal psychology. So like me, she was very experienced in counseling individuals. And so we put out that announcement and we went, and we didn't know if anybody would show up. But the little room that we had said for people to gather was packed. So we ended up dividing the group, where I had one group of maybe 20 and she had another group of maybe 20 or so. And yes, it was like the very first North American sharing circle on Kundalini awakening. And I started the circle by saying to that group, I'm Dr. Yvonne Kason, I'm from Toronto, Canada, and I've had a Kundalini awakening, and I talked a little bit about it. And then everybody in the group had their opportunity to share. Well, I have to tell you, AJ, that my sharing that was like a floodgate open for all of these people, that people were just wanted to tell their story, because for the first time, and for many of them, it was the first time in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, that they were in an environment where there was a medical doctor who would believe them when they were talking about their Kundalini awakening, who wouldn't immediately label them as crazy or hallucinating or you're having a mental illness. And I heard horror stories there, AJ, horror stories, of being admitted to psychiatric hospital, being medicated, being put on, having electroshock therapy. Other people, they're losing their marriages, their families disowning them. Another person talked about that at their church, the pastor said this was work of the devil. And I was profoundly moved by this. Happened in 1990. And after this little sharing circle ended, I went for a walk. This was in Monterey, California, which is right on the Pacific Ocean. And I went for a walk down by the ocean. It was a clear evening. And I had a profound mystical experience when I was walking there by the ocean. I call it my calling mystical experience. And I do write about it in my book. And what happened to me was, all of a sudden, it was like my consciousness, or where my head used to be, cracked open, and where my head used to be became like a sun, radiating light in all directions, this incredible beacon of light in all directions. It was literally like I had no head anymore, and there was just the sun there instead. And I could taste this, it's called amrita, this nectar dripping in the back of my throat. And in this state of, let's call it illumination, because it certainly was illuminated with light, I suddenly knew. And it wasn't that I heard a voice say it. No, it was, I just knew that I was being called. And I knew what I was being called to do. It was time to come out of the closet. I needed to share what I had learned in all my research and experience in the past 12 years. And I had to advocate for experiencers, because the medical profession was doing harm by labeling experiencers as crazy. And society was doing harm by labeling experiencers as crazy, or even churches were doing harm by labeling this as work of the devil. And I felt like I'd been given a sacred gift by the higher power, like a sacred baby, this knowledge about Kundalini and about the human consciousness potential to expand where mystical and paranormal states are normal. But it was now my responsibility to look after this baby and to share this knowledge where spirit guided me to. So I came home from that conference determined, even if it meant losing my medical license, I was going to follow my calling, and I was going to come out of the closet and advocate for experiencers.
I have been one of the many persons who have benefited from participating in your present sharing circles at Spiritual Awakenings International. After going to those sharing circles, I got the courage to talk about my experiences. And I know that a lot of people, for them, it's the first time in their life where they can actually share their stories without, being made fun of or, considered crazy. So I think what Spiritual Awakenings International, apart from the speaker events, I think the sharing circles are vital because you don't only see near death experiencers, you also find a lot of people who have had mystical experiences or psychic experiences and really don't understand what's going on. My case, your case, in a lot of people's cases, it takes them years to understand what happened and more years to integrate this and be able to share it with the world. It's kind of confusing, and it can, you really don't know what to think about it, especially if you are a child like you. Can you talk to us about Spiritual Awakenings International and the mission that you are leading?
Thanks, AJ, for asking. Well, one of my spiritually transformative experiences was in 2019. I got a strong download from Spirit calling me to found a new organization. And I was given the name for the organization, Spiritual Awakenings International. And interestingly enough, a similar partial download was given to someone I had just met, Robert Bear, that he too thought we should found an organization together that would be looking at the whole range of spiritually transformative experiences. So together, we worked to found Spiritual Awakenings International, which launched in 2020, June of 2020. And the mission of Spiritual Awakenings International is to raise awareness the whole range of spiritually transformative experiences that are happening today. And as I mentioned before, that's mystical experiences of many types, near-death experiences, and there are many types of near-death experiences, psychic and intuitive experiences of many types, including out-of-body experiences. Then we have kundalini awakening, spiritual energy awakening, Holy Spirit, which is known by various names, inspired creativity, and then there's a whole group of death-related spiritually transformative experiences. So we wanted to raise awareness globally of this whole range. I talk about it in all of my books, the whole range of experiences. But Spiritual Awakenings International was not just focused on one type of experience. Many groups until Spiritual Awakenings International we're very focused on one type of experience, and that's fine. There's a need for that. Like there'd maybe be one group that's looking just at near-death experiences, or there might be another group that's looking just at some sort of psychic phenomenon. Or there was another group, I was involved with the Kundalini Research Network. We were looking specifically at Kundalini awakenings, and so on, that there were different organizations looking at one type of experience. But Spiritual Awakenings International we're looking at all of them. That's number one. And number two, we are by experiencers for experiencers. So myself as the founder and Robert Bear, we are both multiple STE, multiple NDE experiencers. Our whole advisory board and board are all multiple NDE and STE experiencers. And we want to provide a forum where people can network, and different groups can network, and different organizations can network, that are all trying to raise awareness or to research any type of ST, but we can connect with each other. I look at it like There's all these different lights all over the planet, different groups, organizations, individuals trying to raise awareness. It's time now for those lights to form like a mesh, like to link up with each other, to be a safety network around the planet. And that's one of the goals of Spiritual Awakenings International. We have many affiliated groups from around the world that are networking with each other. And sharing is the third part of our mission. So raising awareness, networking, and sharing. So providing a safe place where people can share. And we do that in our experiencers sharing circles that we're currently running once a month in English and once every 2 months in Spanish. And we are also sharing by having opportunities for people to present and to tell their stories in presentations. And we make videos, we post them on YouTube. People can watch our YouTube videos on our Spiritual Awakenings International YouTube channel on all types of spiritually transformative experiences. And so we have speaker events once a month. And then once a year, we have an online conference where you can hear many speakers, international speakers from around the world, talking about different aspects of spiritually transformative experiences. That is the way we are different, is that we're looking at the whole range of spiritually transformative experiences. And also that we are by experiencers for experiencers. We're an organization led with heart.
Okay, I have 2 questions. When is this convention? It's an annual convention, right?
Yes, we hold it in
question.
June every year, second weekend in June. So this year it's going to be June 10th and June 11th, Saturday, Sunday of 2023. So second Saturday in June. That's our birthday because we launched in 2020, the second Saturday in June. So this will be our 3-year birthday.
The other question I wanted to ask is, if someone is listening or watching this video and wants to participate in these sharing circles and is not really sure, so what can you tell these people? Can they attend and not participate? And is it free?
Absolutely. Yeah. All of the Spiritual Awakenings International events are free. We're counting on people who are able to make donations to help us cover our operating costs so that it's free for anyone, regardless of what your financial situation. So if you would like to participate, you just go to our Spiritual Awakenings International website, which is spiritualawakeningsinternational.org. You go to our events page and you register, and then you can show up at our sharing circle. It's open to everyone. If you're a bit shy and you're not yet comfortable to share, you're welcome to come and just sit quietly and supportively listen to other people. If and when you feel ready to share, you can what you'd like to. What often will help people to sort of warm up is come to one of our speaker events, and that'll help you feel a little more comfortable with the organization and the sorts of experiences we openly talk about. And the other thing is to go to our Spiritual Awakenings International website, where we have spiritually transformative experiences listed in detail that describes the many types of spiritually transformative experiences. It's all taken from my books, or you can read one of my books to help make you feel more comfortable about the type of spiritually transformative experiences. And many people tell me that reading my books helps them because they go, oh, I had that kind of experience. I didn't know there was a name for it. So that's the name for that type of experience. So I think that will help people feel more comfortable. The other thing I want to mention while we're at it is go to our Spiritual Awakenings International YouTube channel and subscribe to that too. And then you'll be notified if you click the bell whenever we post a new video. So if you missed our event or you're in a time zone that it didn't work out for you to attend the event, you can watch the video when we post it on YouTube.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kason. That was really nice. I enjoyed interviewing you. I think this is the 3rd time we do something, but each time it's quite different, We talked about your 2 different near-death experiences in the past, and now we talked about your childhood near-death experiences. That leaves us with 1 near-death experience for a future video.
That's right. And I
So,
just want to remind people about my book, because this is my book launch interview, Soul Lessons from the Light. And I'm very excited about it. And I'm really grateful, AJ, that you're interviewing me to help me launch my new book, Soul Lessons from the Light. So thank you very much for that.
oh, you're welcome. Thank you for coming and thank you for watching this video. Take care.